Asians are accepting the whole idea of social integration? Well, one trend here is the involvement of Asians in mixed marriages. Since in the long run this trend would probably increase, we asked Tom and Vishwa, who got married 6 years ago, about some of the problems involved. When Vish first told her mother, for example, that she wanted to marry a white man, she met with strong objections. Her mother wanted to know how the families from two different cultures would be able to mix. Since Vish's grandmother couldn't speak English, how was she and other older members of the family going to communicate with Tom and his parents?
And then she says, well, if we get across that barrier, what's going to happen about, if Tommy eats meat, things like that. And then she carried on talking about if we had any children, what would they be brought up as, what religion they would follow. And then she talked about problems they'd come across at school, being of mixed blood or being half caste, that there would be children in school who would be cruel to them, and carried on from there.
Yeah, their reaction to it took many levels, really, and Vish has explained quite a few of them. But they were also worried about the white community itself. You often find that a lot of Asians have views about the white community, just as a lot of white people have views about the Asian community, which are not based on fact at all. They're based on myth. They're based on reading papers like The Sun and various other journals that come out. And they were scared about the supposedly high level of divorce rate amongst the white community. And they were telling Vish that the marriage would only last for 6 months, because they thought all white marriages only last for 6 months. I think when Vish told her father, that was the time that we began to realise how difficult it was all going to be. Her mother had obviously reacted fairly strongly, but we felt between us that we could overcome that problem. But once Vish told her father and his reaction was totally negative to start off with, we then realised that it was going to be fairly difficult. And it was then that we sort of also made the decision, obviously not consciously, it's going on, it was an ongoing thing, but we made the decision then that we wouldn't break away from the family to get married. We wanted to get married within both our families. And obviously it was going to hurt Vish's family, but we didn't want to break away totally. We wanted to try and overcome obviously what was turning out to be quite a big obstacle.
It was an obstacle eventually tackled on the basis of advice to Vish's mother, perhaps unexpectedly, from her very traditional grandmother.
And my granny said to her, obviously, she wouldn't accept it if she was in my mother's position, but to having known me for a long time and having known my mother for a long time, she said that if that is what Vish wants to do and she's determined to get on with it, then having sort of spent so many days trying to change her mind, you could perhaps try even longer and bring the rest of the family in, and uncles and aunties, and see if they can change my mind for me. And if that isn't possible, then let her get on with it, and you try and arrange a wedding for her and make sure that you go to it, because otherwise you're going to regret it, because she's the only daughter you've got.
In the event, both families got together for a traditional Indian engagement. Tom's mother gave a red sari and helped the other women relatives in preparing the bride, and Tom's father came forward to give his blessing. Then Tom and Vish went on from the conventional British rituals at a registry office in the morning to a full-scale Hindu wedding ceremony in the afternoon, with the symbolic finger-snapping and Vish's mother holding up the coconut as they arrived at the hall. How did Tom feel about it all?
Well, at first I felt as if I was in a totally unreal situation. I couldn't understand what the priest was saying. Then I suddenly realised that even in a Catholic ceremony, because I was brought up a Catholic, you can't understand what the priest is saying there. He's speaking Latin, and very few people speak Latin. And within the Hindu ceremony, the priest was actually speaking Sanskrit, and very few people can understand Sanskrit. So I realised that I wasn't the only one that was in the dark. Most of the people in the audience couldn't understand what he was saying. He was just going through the normal rituals that they understood and believed. My family found it quite fascinating, obviously because it was new to them, but also because there was so much going on outside the wedding. The children were running around, all the relatives that had come to the wedding were talking to each other, and obviously they were all used to being in a church, and they couldn't understand why a supposedly religious occasion was being treated in this way. And again, when they thought about it, they began to realise that in an English wedding ceremony, the reception plays very much that function. People get together again for the first time in maybe years, maybe months, it doesn't really matter, but they use it very much as a time for reunion. And that's really what the Asian ceremony meant to most of the Asian people that had come along to it. You see, I don't see Vish as an Asian, I see Vish as my wife. It's only other people that see Vish as someone from a different culture. That's not being naive. I know she's from a different culture, and I know the problems that we've had being a mixed marriage. But within the marriage itself, we're just two people that love each other and want to stay together. Within the house itself, most of the food we eat is Asian food. I actually still do eat some meat, but most of the time we eat curries and chapatis and rice, and very much what any Asian would eat in Britain today. My friends find that quite interesting because they enjoy coming round for meals with us. As far as religion in the house is concerned, I haven't really got any religion, so I don't impose that upon the structure in any way. And Vish still prays to her various gods at the certain times of the day or after she's had a bath, as is normal within the Asian community.
We have two cultures in the same home. We have Indian food. I dress up with Western clothes. I don't wear saris all the time. We do have, so to speak, English food occasionally, or sometimes quite often, depending on how we feel.
I think our lifestyle is possible because of the sort of people we are and the various professions we've got. If I was still working on the factory floor and Vish was staying at home and living within that sort of network, I think our lifestyle would be more difficult. I think because we come from a certain background, which I went to university and Vish went to university, all the people we know appear to have come to terms with the problem a lot quicker. My parents often go around to Vish's house, and Vish's parents visit my house. My parents take Vish's parents out to the pub at night, even though Vish's parents don't drink. They're like most Gujaratis and Hindus. They don't drink a lot, or they don't drink at all. My family take them down to the pub, which they enjoy for a short time. They don't like it that much.
Your parents invite them to parties or anything that's happening at their house, and same with my parents, you know. I think your parents were invited to an Indian wedding once, weren't they? One of my cousins was getting married, and as it happened, Tom's dad said, "Oh, I wouldn't mind going to the wedding," and my mum said, "Oh, we were going to invite you anyway," and they came along.
And that example illustrated so many different facets of the Asian family that in a program so short as this, we simply wouldn't be able to go into in any detail. It was interesting how the mother was prepared to encourage her, how the grandmother of a much older generation was prepared to intercede and encourage the girl, how the father was opposed and then was prepared to give in, and how at the end of the day almost all the relations joined in and blessed her marriage. This, I think, goes to show both the strength of the Asian family as also the weakness of the Asian family, that the weakness demonstrated by the fact that it took her such a long time to bring them round to what she wanted them to do.
But wouldn't the parents on both sides of the family be right to have anxieties on behalf of any children of the marriage?
Certainly. It is very striking that children born of interracial marriages tend to find acceptance from their white peers far more difficult than an Asian child. I think there may be several explanations for this, but one that immediately comes to my mind is that when a child is partly white, partly Asian, the white children would tend to expect him to behave as a white child. And yet the child is half Asian and therefore cannot fully conform to the expectations of his white peers. And therefore the child is confused, his peers are confused, and as a result all sorts of hostilities begin to appear. The sorts of problems from which a 100% Asian child is mercifully free. And this is widely known and naturally upsets parents. And second, the crime rate among children of mixed marriages tends to be considerably higher. I'm told as high as 10 times the crime amongst children born entirely of parents of a single race. Now, both these factors would seem to indicate that there is a source for some concern and some anxiety. Now, I think one must remember that these trends are simply, they arise out of the current social climate. And if social climate were to change, where colour prejudice were to diminish, or racial discrimination were to diminish, perhaps we might see trends of an entirely different kind. 2 surveys were conducted recently intended to find out what the Asian youth between the ages of 16 and 20 thought about marrying outside their own community, largely in terms of marrying white girls and boys. And it was interesting that as many as 22% said that they did not see any objection in marrying with white society. You will see that this seems to show a considerable attitude of relaxation on the part of the Asian community and the spirit of adjustment to the white society. In Canada, the Asians have been there much longer than here, and in large numbers they began to settle in 1910, 1911. And survey conducted there not very long ago showed that only 13% of Asians there were prepared to countenance the possibility of marrying in the white society. Asians who have been here for a much shorter period, they are beginning to look upon this society as their home and to countenance the possibility of establishing a more meaningful relationship even at the familial level. The fact that the practice of importing spouses from the Asian subcontinent is considerably diminishing. The fact that interracial marriages are looked upon with favor, as I said earlier, as many as 22% of the Asian youth are prepared to countenance the possibility, although they might behave differently when the crunch came. The fact that the white society itself, despite all racial discrimination, despite all racist attacks in certain parts of the country, is increasingly beginning to accept the Asians as here to stay. In some cases, certainly amongst the middle classes, there is even an appreciation of the cultural values of the Asian community. This would seem to me to indicate that there is a ground is being prepared in both communities for greater degree of understanding and reconciliation. And therefore, I cannot see how it can end in anything but genuinely plural society in Britain, from which the white society as well as the ethnic minorities have a great deal to benefit.
Dr. Bikku Parekh has written at length about Asians in Britain in the booklet that accompanies this series. It is available by sending a cheque or postal order for £1 to the Commission for Racial Equality, 10 Allington Street, London SW1. The CRE will also give details about obtaining copies of films from this series for training and discussion purposes.